A forgotten gem is a fairly common phrase, usually used to describe something that failed to make that big of a splash on its initial release, so it didn't make that big of an impact on the cultural zeitgeist, and because of that, it kind of fell out of the cultural consciousness. Some examples would be things like Lady Hawk, Fired Up, or The Enchanted Forest Chronicles, or even Hocus Pocus by Focus. The last two are a book series and a song, in case you didn't follow me on that. So if those are forgotten gems, then the movie that I want to talk about today is more like a lost treasure, because I don't know why it's been forgotten. It was released in 1993, Hollywood's greatest year by quantity of must-see movies. Link in the description. And against the other 30 incredible movies that were released that year, it was the third highest grossing behind Mrs. Doubtfire and Jurassic Park. That means that it beat Schindler's List, Sleepless in Seattle, Groundhog Day, Demolition Man, and The Nightmare Before Christmas. Seriously, watch that linked video. The number of must-see movies released that year is staggering. And on top of that, this movie was nominated for Best Picture, back when it meant something. I don't consider this to be a good movie. I don't consider it to be a great movie. I consider it to be one of the greatest movies ever made. It's one of only 73 movies that I have given 10 stars on IMDb, and that may sound like a lot, but I've rated over 1,961 movies and TV shows. And not only that, but I consider this to be probably one of my top 10 of all time. Now that you're wondering, I've only rated 9 things with 1 star. And one of them was Carousel. So what is this absolute classic? 1993's The Fugitive. Why does no one talk about this movie anymore? Third highest grossing film of the year, nominated for Best Picture, one of Harrison Ford's best performances, Tommy Lee Jones' Oscar-winning role, Jane Lynch's third movie, Julianne Moore's first movie, Joe Pantoliano with hair, a young Rose from Lost, the janitor from Scrubs, James Newton Howard, one of the writers of Die Hard. I haven't even gotten to the actual movie yet. This is just the pedigree. And on top of all that, this movie shows just how dadgum good a remake can be, because it's based on a TV show. The TV show, and, well, the movie too, followed a surgeon named Dr. Richard Kimball, who was falsely accused of killing his wife, tried, convicted, and sentenced to death. But then, on a train transferring to the prison where his sentence was going to be carried out, it wrecked and he managed to escape. So now he's living on the lam, trying not to be caught, while also looking for his wife's real killer, a man with one arm. This was actually one of the first TV shows to combine the Monster of the Week formula with an overarching narrative. Every episode saw Richard pretending to be someone else while helping someone or hiding from a new threat to his semi-freedom, with the narrative of clearing his name in the background. Kind of like The Pretender in the 90s, if anybody remembers that one. Can you stream that anywhere? Oh, Amazon. But The Fugitive is consistently ranked as one of the greatest TV shows of all time, and its finale is considered one of the top 10 greatest ever made, and objectively one of the biggest moments in TV history. It was the most watched television episode for 13 years, watched by 25.7 million households and an estimated 78 million people at the same time. Even more impressive, that means that almost 46% of the Americans who own TVs were watching that show. 72% of the people watching television that night were watching that one show. Pinky and the Brain even referenced this episode inside of a joke that I have no idea if there's any truth to.
1967, sir. Almost everyone in the country was watching the same TV show, and when it was over, they all flushed their toilets at once.
I really want it to be true. This series actually lends itself to becoming a movie because of its overarching narrative and its definitive ending, so it could easily be told inside of a more contained story. Let that be a lesson for what you should look for if you're in the remaking business. Now, on to this fantastic movie. Really, I'm just going to gush for a while, and I will be spoiling things, so if you haven't seen it, you should definitely do that before you finish this video. It's well worth it. We start with flyover shots of Chicago, interspersed with quick, slow-motion shots of Mrs. Kimball fighting for her life. They are black and white, but still brutal in their brevity. The intercutting with the city adds the helplessness of her and the viewer, because there's no help coming, and the movie won't even let you be there for her. Once she's given a fatal gunshot wound, we cut to the crime scene and the aftermath. Photos are taken, and 2 cops take Richard, who has a cut on his neck, to the police station to find out his side of the story. I've only seen this actor in 3 things, and he's a cop in all 3. 2 of them, he's a cop in Chicago, and 1 of them, he's a cop in a movie that was filmed in Chicago. Just a weirdly specific bit of typecasting to find yourself in. We cut to a flashback of earlier that night. Both Kimballs are at a fundraising party. This scene is great. Brevity is the soul of wit, and in under a minute, it establishes that the two of them have a great relationship, introduces two people important to the story, and drops a subtle but important clue.
Oh, before I forget. Here, thanks for the loaner. Keys are downstairs. Any gas in it? Yeah.
They drive home and they're flirting in a very comfortable way. She thanks him for coming to the benefit, so you know that the charity work is her thing, but he's all for it. Abruptly, a call comes in asking him to help with the surgery, which establishes him as a respected surgeon. She tells him that,
I'll wait up for
wow. So he goes into the surgery. Back to the police station, things start to go wrong for Richard. He tells them that he fought with the one-armed man, but there's no evidence of a forced entry. She scratched him when he tried to move her because he's a surgeon, so maybe he could have helped, but that's a hard sell when she was clearly killed during a fight. Also, she was shot with his gun, and there are no other fingerprints. She was wealthy, and Richard realizes that they suspect him due to the windfall that he'll get from her death, as well as the lack of evidence to corroborate his story. He's infuriated at the suggestion, and you'll get tired of hearing me say this, but Harrison Ford plays this perfectly. He is in shock. He's trying to remember the answers to their questions, but his brain doesn't want to work right now, and he's really just trying to hold it together. But that control breaks once he realizes that they're accusing him. The anger builds and becomes forceful. We get one of Harrison Ford's best points. But just before it builds to yelling, because he's trying to let the emotion of anger out, grief, the emotion that he's been suppressing, pushes past that anger, and he breaks down in a way that you can tell is the first time he's let himself think about it. The acting is so good. They arrest him, and we cut to the trial where we learn more about the attack, as well as gain the horrifying revelation that she was still alive and fighting when he got home, but he didn't help her because he didn't know that she was in trouble. Throughout the trial, we very smartly only see the prosecution, none of the defense. The writers built a pretty good case against Kimball, and not showing any of his rebuttals really build the hopelessness of his situation. The movie actually does a lot to avoid blaming the justice system for his conviction, and instead lets you, as an audience member, understand why this happened. Really, we only know that Richard didn't do it because we know that Richard didn't do it. The final piece of evidence is after she was shot and had her skull bashed in, she managed to call 911, and they have a recording of that call. And while she was on that call, she made the unfortunate decision to say, Richard, he's trying to kill me, which could easily be interpreted as saying, Richard is trying to kill me. Again, Harrison Ford crushes this scene, and the director, Andrew Davis, cleverly only shows his reaction to the descriptions of how his wife was killed and hearing her voice in the 911 recording, as opposed to the evidence against him. Wanting to prove his innocence is a good motivation, but catching the man who actually did it is a stronger source of sympathy, and showing his grief at hearing how his wife was killed is a simple but very clever way to build that. And speaking of that recording, Celia Ward deserved an Oscar nod for that 45 seconds.
Would you repeat that, please? Ma'am?
He's trying to kill me.
What is she doing with her voice? That is one of the great death performances I have ever heard. It sounds like her life force is being sucked out of her body. It's fantastic and gut-wrenching. He's found guilty and sentenced to death, and again, look at Harrison Ford. Can an actor show anger, shock, despair, and sorrow all at the same time? He can, apparently. This movie was also nominated for Best Sound Editing, and this scene has 3 sounds that I absolutely love. This gavel, this cell door, and I love the sound of this phone click. If cell phones made that sound when you hung up, I would call people more often. Cut forward an unimportant amount of time. Richard is being transferred to a different prison to await his death sentence with several other convicts, and we haven't even finished the credits. Remember when movies could suck you in and get you up to speed in under 10 minutes? Pepperidge Farm remembers. Near the end of the drive, one of the inmates, I think also convicted of murder based on the jumpsuit colors, starts having a seizure. One cop is nice and concerned about him. The other cop is a jerk and says just wait till he gets to the prison. Nice cop checks on him, and it is in fact a fake seizure. so the inmate shivs him with a sharpened hairbrush. Jerk Cop, who admittedly was right about the situation, shoots the inmate with a shotgun, so he's dead. Another inmate sees this as an opportunity and tries to overpower Jerk Cop. During their scuffle, the bus driver gets shot, so now he's dead, and the bus rolls off the road. The two cops are still alive, Richard is still alive, and another inmate named Copeland is still alive. Jerk Cop sees his stabbed partner and begs Richard to help because he was a doctor. Richard says, "Unlock me," and Jerk Cop tosses him his keys because obviously Richard needs his hands to do anything. The keys get tossed toward Copeland. Then everyone discovers that the bus came to rest on an active train line. The hard way. Part of this movie's brilliant setup is building our love for Richard. First off, he's played by Harrison Ford, but then also his wife was murdered and he was wrongfully accused. Now that's a lot based off of just information about him, but now we start building up liking him as a person. Jerk Cop hands him the keys and there is no thought to taking advantage of the situation. He goes straight to the injured cop and starts trying to help. He's interrupted by a train horn and the first thing that he says is, "Help me get this man out of this train." Jerk Cop abandons Richard and his partner to save his own skin. A desperate Richard asks Copeland to help, but he runs out too. So it's just Richard and the injured cop, and he refuses to leave without getting him to safety. The train barreling down on him, Richard tosses the officer out first, and then, in true Hollywood fashion, jumps out just before the train hits. What follows? Recently, people have really started rediscovering a love for practical effects, and this train wreck, the way that they pulled it off is pure movie magic. You see, what they did was they found an abandoned train line, and then they got an old train, and then they parked a bus on that train line, and then they ran the train into it while it was shot from 11 different cameras. These people wrecked a train and filmed it. The only thing that's fake about this scene is inserting Harrison Ford into a handful of shots. There are a few scenes that take place at the aftermath, and they had to be planned after this was done because you can only predict with a certain level of certainty how a train wreck is going to end up. This gets even crazier. In 2010, I went whitewater rafting on the French Broad River in North Carolina, and we got to an area where inside of the trees, I could just see a single train car. Then our guide said, "If any of y'all are movie fans, up there is where they filmed the train wreck scene in The Fugitive. You can only really see one or two cars from here, but if you actually hike up there, the whole train's still there." It's probably still there now. I don't see why it wouldn't be. Anyway, Richard is lucky to be alive. His hands are free, but his leg irons are still intact. Copeland survived, though, and he has the keys. He unlocks Richard and tells him, "Go where you want, just don't follow me," and then he runs off. Richard, who does have an injury in his side, gets up and runs in the opposite direction. He's now the fugitive. Police come to examine the wreck, and, ladies and gentlemen, Sam Gerard. There have been many times when Hollywood had an instinct about an actor's ability, so they keep casting him, but they're really not sure what to do with him. Johnny Depp showed up in 1984 and was immediately thrown into the pretty boy category because, he's a very handsome man. But it wasn't until Tim Burton cast him in Edward Scissorhands that directors realized, oh, he's actually really good at playing odd characters. It took 20 years for Matthew McConaughey to finally be given the chance to play a really dramatic role in True Detective and Dallas Buyers Club, and then everyone just kind of said, oh, this guy's actually really good. He was getting steady work, and we all knew that he was really talented, but no one quite knew what to do with that talent. Kind of like a baseball coach. Sometimes you know someone's really good at playing the game, but you're not sure what position to put them in. Tommy Lee Jones first showed up in 1970, and he worked steadily for 23 years, but it wasn't until The Fugitive that people discovered the character that he excels at. And not just excels at, he is so good at this character that when we see this kind of character, we just call it Tommy Lee Jones. I don't know what was on the page and what came to life on set, but Jones created a new archetype amalgamation in this movie. Never before had we seen a by-the-book character with swagger. He enters a situation and he is in charge, but he follows the rules too. He's respected by everyone because he does his job well, and you know that he got that job on merit based off of every single thing that he does and says. And that is the perfect antagonist for this movie. Richard is smart, methodical, thoughtful, and strategic, and you don't want a character like Martin Riggs or Harry Callahan going after him because they're not a threat. They never find him. No, you need somebody who knows how to work with the system as it exists, both because that creates the greatest threat to Richard and it embodies the system itself as it comes after him. But you also need him to be likable. Why? Because Richard is trying to find the real culprit. And in order for that to feel like an achievable goal, we need for the person who is hunting him seem like someone who will listen to reason should Richard find the real criminal. He can't be somebody like Javert. He needs to be more interested in justice than just blindly following the law as written. Seeing a lawman who knows the law and works to support it while also seeming like a good man tells us that there's hope for Richard. If he can get enough evidence, the system, embodied by Sam, will listen. Do we like Sam? Yes, from second one. This is how we meet him. I don't know if this line was really sweated over or if Jeb and David are just geniuses, but this is one of the most perfect entrance lines ever, made more perfect by a perfect delivery. There are 9 words in that introduction and 5 of them are just repeated. The line itself is funny. That is a dry and sarcastic understatement when you're looking at a literal train wreck. And this is the first real laugh in the movie, and when a character can make you laugh, you like them. But when it's the first laugh you've had in 20 minutes, you love them. But then there's also a lot of subtext to it. He's not talking about just the train wreck. He's also talking about the fact that it was a prison bus hit by a train, as well as passing some low-key judgment on how the situation is being handled. Then off the page, Jones' performance adds more layers of subtext. Time to get to work is implied by his delivery. This is now my mess to clean up, is also part of his delivery. I've been talking this long about 9 words. We know who this man is from 9 words. Character introductions just do not get any better than that. I mean, maybe Lego Batman's "Relax, everybody, I'm here." That's just 4 words, so it's technically better. As he walks through the train wreck, we also meet his team in a further fantastic introduction. The 90s were so good, you guys. We were so spoiled and we had no idea what we had. First, Cosmo is the first to respond, so you assume he's the second in command. Everyone follows behind discussing what's going on, and then they immediately start studying the scene without outside input. So they're smart. One guy points something out, so he has no problem speaking up. Veteran. Rose gets chastised for the shoes that she's wearing, so she's not used to field work. She doesn't take any crap from them, so she's been in the team for a while, too. Meanwhile, there's a guy behind them who looks younger and says nothing, so that you know he's new. Sam's team is being quippy, and he doesn't say anything about it, which also makes you like him. They ask who's in charge, and Sam gets his name wrong, maybe on purpose?
Sheriff Rogers.
Which tells you exactly what he thinks about how things are being handled. Sam sends 2 of his guys on an assignment, and they do it without question, further establishing his dominant position. Sam arrives just in time to hear Jerk Cop giving his statement and claiming that he threw his partner out of the bus. I didn't just arbitrarily call him a jerk. Sam doesn't believe him. He tries to talk to the sheriff in charge, but he's dismissed. Jones gives the perfect expression of, "Sure, I'll wait, but now I'm not going to be nice to you." Jerk Cop says he thinks that Richard is dead. Sam doesn't believe him and wants to start searching. The sheriff doesn't want to, so Sam takes over the investigation of the wreck. The sheriff asks on whose authority, and we see Rose's value to the team because she's moved in with the paperwork before it was even needed. Sheriff accepts pretty quickly because he believes Jerk Cop and he's happy to have paperwork taken away from him. Sam's team appears with leg irons, which Sam is not remotely surprised about. Jerk Cop admits that there's a possibility that Richard is free, and Sam is not surprised. Now we see a character transformation. The Sam that we first met felt like a match for Richard, but now we realize that we have only been seeing investigation Sam Gerard. There might be something here, there might not be, but once there is something, he switches to Manhunt Sam, and that version is an actual threat to Richard.
Listen up, ladies and gentlemen. Our fugitive has been on the run for 90 minutes.
His stature, delivery, face, everything about him says this fugitive is doomed. There is not an ounce of doubt in his mind that he's going to find Richard, and we're inclined to agree. So I know that some of you are probably nervous about the length of this video, but now that we're really into it, I'll be skipping forward a little bit faster. You're welcome. Richard manages to grab a mechanic jumpsuit so he's not dressed like a convict anymore, and then he sneaks into a hospital where he can stitch up his injury, shave, and steal a change of clothes. He knows he needs to get far away, so he steals an ambulance to drive farther faster. The larger the search radius, the less likely you are to be caught. Sam discovers that he stole an ambulance and chases him with cops and a helicopter. So this is why the dynamic between Sam and Richard is so good. Neither of them are dumb, which makes it way more intriguing to watch. Sam never catches Richard because Richard screwed up, and Richard never gets away because Sam screwed up. Richard's still in the ambulance because it was available. It might take a little while to notice that it's missing, but in the meantime, you can go pretty far while breaking the speed limit without attracting too much attention. Remember, this was 1993, so government vehicles weren't low-jacked yet, so they couldn't just track the ambulance. Sam knew to search for the ambulance because Richard took the totally in-character action of helping two paramedics with a gurney that just happened to have the cop that he rescued from the bus. The cop recognized him and reported it. But, continuing to build on the fact that Richard is a good person, even though he saw the recognition in the cop's face, he made sure that the doctors knew that he had a stab wound in his stomach. They chase Richard to a dam and make a point of showing how overmatched he is because he's desperate at the wheel of his ambulance while Sam is cool as a cucumber in the helicopter. Richard gets boxed in at the dam and tries to escape in the sewer. Sam realizes that and follows him. During the chase, he trips and drops his gun. Richard picks it up and aims it at him, giving us the movie's most iconic moment.
I didn't kill my wife! I don't care!
This perfectly sets up Sam's character arc. He doesn't care. He's a fugitive hunter, and Richard is a fugitive. Richard was convicted, and that is all that Sam needs to know. So Richard needs to get him to care. Also, in respect to pacing, it's fantastic that they don't make us wait a long time for these two characters to have their first confrontation. It's less than 12 hours in world time and around 15 minutes since we saw the chase begin. They've seen each other, and they both have a face and a voice for their enemy. I really need to watch more of Jeb Stewart's movies. Richard doesn't have a violent bone in his body, so he doesn't do anything to Sam and keeps running. Sam has a spare gun and corners Richard at the end of the tunnel, and we have our second big stunt of the movie, even if it was accomplished with a dummy. It looks really good, though, and apparently there is some debate about whether or not that fall is, in fact, survivable. So, Richard is presumed dead and managed to float far enough downstream that he wasn't found, so now he's a ghost. His decision to use his freedom is illustrated in a dream while he's sleeping in the forest. It is such a great contrast of showing him and his wife being intimate with each other and kissing, but then the kiss smash cuts to him giving her mouth to mouth in a desperate attempt to save her life and highlight what was taken from him. So now he's after her killer, which leads to him making the insane choice of going back to his hometown of Chicago, where he could be recognized at any moment. The next scene is one of the great misdirects ever, and I really want to talk about it while just assuming that you've already seen the movie. Seriously, if you haven't watched it, watch it now. I don't know if it's currently streaming anywhere, but even if it isn't, just go ahead and buy it. You will not regret it. I swear to you. So here's what's been established so far. Sam and his team are really smart, and a lot of people are looking for Richard, which means that he's in danger of being spotted at pretty much any time. So we see him walking down the street when a woman pulls over to offer him a ride. It's clearly cold, so he accepts. Cut to Sam's office.
Yes. All right, Sammy, we got it. Shacked up with some babe over in Whiting.
She left work tonight and took him home.
Oh no, they found him. We have no problem accepting that because it's happened once already, and the way that Ford plays accepting that ride shows a thoughtful hesitation, showing that he thinks that it's a risk. So, now we have the marshals raiding the house to catch their man. Our first clue that something's up is when we see the woman isn't the woman that we saw in the car, and then we learn that it's actually Copeland, not Richard. The scene progresses after that revelation because, like I just keep saying, this is such great writing. Like I said, we like the guys that are hunting Richard. His story is very dark and dramatic, and really there's not a whole lot of room for levity inside of what he's trying to accomplish. The marshals, however, are able to joke with each other, and there's a real camaraderie between them. And that actually does a lot to add to the loneliness that we feel for Richard because so many of his scenes are just him. When they approach the house, there's a lot of tension, and it slowly builds as the marshals get closer and closer, and we keep cutting to and seeing that there's more and more of them. And then they start pulling out guns. How is Richard going to get out of this? The place is absolutely surrounded. What is going to happen? So the danger in just simply revealing that it's Copeland and not Richard is that all that tension will just fall flat for no reason and leave the audience really unsatisfied. But the second that we realize it's Copeland is the second that he grabs one of the marshals as a hostage. So what ends up happening is we transfer all of that tension from one character that we like to another character that we like, and none of the tension is lost. It just flips our perception of the scene. It's actually ratcheted up at that point. Richard was probably only going to be arrested, but Newman could die. Sam ends up killing Copeland because, to quote him,
he was going to kill one of my kids.
And Newman's reaction is great. A man just died behind him. He's in shock. Then he tells Sam that he thinks that he should have tried to work out a deal to keep Copeland alive. Sam doesn't justify anything. He just says he doesn't bargain. Then he throws his coat over Newman to show that he does care about him. So much happens in that tiny little exchange. Richard's battle now seems even more difficult because we already knew that Sam doesn't care, but now we know he doesn't listen either. But it also shows that he truly cares about his team. He's also kind of chastising the new guy. There's a subtext throughout the entire exchange of, I had to shoot him because you messed up. Character work is just throughout every moment of this movie. Cut to Richard wandering through Chicago. He calls his lawyer on a payphone because he needs money. His lawyer says no, turn yourself in. Richard hangs up. Now, you could argue that this is a stupid move. Of course, his lawyer isn't going to give him any money. That is crazy illegal. But I think that it shows how desperate Richard is, and it establishes that he really doesn't want to drag any of his friends into this. This is made a little bit more clear later when one of his friends is being interviewed, and she says that if he asked her for help, she would gladly give it because she thinks that he's innocent. But she also doesn't think that he would ask for help because that's not his style. So the lawyer's phone was bugged, and from the recording of that phone call, the marshals are able to figure out that he's back in Chicago. And this is just such a great scene, partially because the person who first suggests that he's back in Chicago isn't Sam. In fact, Sam laughs at it and has to eat crow, showing us that he's not infallible, though he does brag that he didn't think Richard was dead.
So he showed up not dead yet. Let that be a lesson to you boys and girls. Don't ever argue with the big dog. Big dog is always right.
I also love that they do the obligatory sound isolation scene, but this one feels way more accurate than it usually does because it doesn't get fully isolated. The noise they want to hear is just a little bit louder than it was.
Hold it right there where the lawyer says that he sounds guilty. There's bells in the background. There's a guy on a PA. I want to drop everything but the guy on the PA. Can you do that?
Yeah, I'll try it. Hold on.
Why did you run? Running only makes you look guilty.
Next, stop.
Merchandise mart.
So now we cut to Richard approaching a friend of his, Charlie, who I really thought was Phil Hartman for a long time, and asking him for some money to keep him alive. He gets invited into the car, but he declines. The marshals interview the cops that arrested Richard, and I just love this brief moment.
Why did Richard Kimball kill his wife?
He did it for the money.
What do you mean he did it for the money? He's a doctor. He's already rich.
Well, she was more rich.
That brief moment is the first glimmer of hope that we have for Richard. It's the first crack in Sam. You can tell that both he and the marshals find that reasoning to be kind of ridiculous. The scene also shows how smart Sam is. He's hunting Richard, but he doesn't want Richard to feel hunted, so maybe he'll make a mistake. Richard moves into someone's basement because he can afford it. Now the police are being alerted to his presence in Chicago. Richard sneaks into a hospital, looks around the prosthetics lab, and steals a janitor's ID. This movie has a couple of scenes in this hospital, and I think they showed this dude in the roller skates in all of them. Sam questions Charlie, and he admits to seeing Richard that morning and giving him money. He also tells them that they won't catch Richard because he's too smart. They ask if he's as smart as Charlie, and Charlie says, smarter. I mention that because it's ironic foreshadowing. Now we get a montage. Richard gets a photo of himself in a photo booth and buys clothes that match the hospital janitors. At this point, you wonder how much money Charlie gave him. Sam questions hospital staff. Richard keeps a low profile in Chicago while studying prosthetics. Hello, Jane Lynch. Lovely as always. Richard is trying to figure out what kind of prosthetic the man he fought had. Sam is getting frustrated. He can't understand why Richard came back to Chicago, so he starts looking into Richard's case. Richard makes an ID for the hospital. Richard is asleep when suddenly the police show up at the house he's staying in. He hears them running around the house. He's panicking, but it turns out it's his landlord's son they're after. But now Richard has to leave because there's no way that guy won't turn him in. He goes to the hospital and pretends to clean while checking in their system to find men who received the prosthetic his wife's killer had. He gets a list of 5 people. The landlady's son turns him in. Sam searches the apartment and can tell from his trash that he's made a fake ID and determines from scraps that he made the ID for that hospital. And at this point, we get a great throwback to the TV show. Like I said, a common reoccurrence inside the show is that Richard would throw caution to the wind about being caught if he came across someone in trouble. Richard is on his way out, but we heard earlier that there was a bus crash and the hospital is overloaded with a bunch of kids. Because of that, the exits are blocked by concerned parents and a few police officers, so he hangs back. Then he sees a doctor not do his full diligence. Again, this movie does a great job of not making anyone look bad or directly pointing a finger at anyone. This guy isn't a bad doctor, he's just swamped. They show him having to run to one kid directly from another kid, and then he just gets asked to move on before he's quite done, so he gives his opinion then and there. But Richard's watching him, and he's scared that he missed something. Because he's standing around dressed like staff, a doctor, Julianne Moore's first film role, asks him to bring the kid to an observation room. On the way, Richard checks him out and sees what the other guy missed. He changes the kid's orders and takes him in for an emergency operation. The whole sequence serves a dual purpose. On the one hand, it's just a nice throwback to the TV show, and on the other hand, it builds our empathy for Richard because he is a good person who increased his chances of being caught in order to save a kid's life. And I honestly think that from a dramatic perspective, it's one of the best sequences in the movie. This is the kind of scene that often gets cut for time first because it doesn't directly move the story along. And a lot of times those are the scenes that build up character and let us know who they are. But this scene gets around that because while it is a good dramatic story, it also turns out to be something that almost gets Richard caught. The doctor who told Richard to take the kid to observation finds out where he was actually taken, and she confronts Richard about it. Again, Ford gives just a fantastic delivery.
Who changed those orders?
I don't know what you mean.
It is so hard to be a good actor playing someone who is bad at lying, trying their best. She takes his ID and tries to call security, but he hightails it. Sam arrives just as Richard's leaving, but from a completely different doorway, which helps show how close he was to being caught without it feeling contrived. Sam is questioning the doctor, and he asks how the boy is doing, and she says that the surgery saved his life. That continues to bother Sam. He's starting to care. Cosmo then tells him that it's really starting to bother him too, though. Why on earth would an uninjured, wanted fugitive come into a hospital? Only a police station would have more cops in it. Then a man missing an arm walks past them, and then they think, wait a minute, could he be looking for a one-armed man? The man he claimed killed his wife. Why would a guilty man risk his freedom to find someone who doesn't exist? So they look into the system, but they don't have as much information as Richard had, so they only get it down to 47. Standard procedure? Check if they have criminal records. Meanwhile, Richard discovers that one of the guys on his list is in prison for armed robbery, and he needs to go see him. I love that they never directly say that it's a prison or that this is a bad idea. Instead, they just have this happen. And again, this doesn't make the cops look dumb. If you were a cop and you knew that there was a wanted fugitive out there, would it ever cross your mind to think that he might just walk into your precinct? Meanwhile, that criminal record check has led Sam to the same place, and even one of his men doesn't think that there's a chance of Richard coming here. They come up with a contrived reason for Sam to separate from his men, but the scene is amusing, so you let it go.
Hinky. What does that mean, Vince? Hinky.
I don't know, strange.
Weird. Why don't you say strange or weird? I mean, hinky, that has no meaning.
Always say hinky.
I don't want you guys using words around me that got no meaning. I'm taking the stairs and walking.
As soon as the inmate arrives, Richard knows that it's the wrong guy, so he has to leave. The monitor is suspicious, but he doesn't do anything about it. Richard is leaving, but he's spotted by Sam. Stairway chase! This one makes more sense because it's downstairs instead of up. Cat and mouse game through City Hall, I guess. Does Chicago have a prison in its City Hall? Seems like a bad idea. Richard manages to get his only laugh with how he briefly detains Sam to get some distance between them.
Officer, there's a man in a blue top coat waving a gun and screaming. And a woman. Stop that man!
He barely manages to get away. This is my one complaint about this movie. I don't like that Sam shoots to kill here. It doesn't fit at the moment. To wound, sure, but not kill. The marshals are smart, so one of them goes to the roof to keep an eye from the sky. And just basic keeping up with previous scenes, which modern screenwriters find difficult, he uses a walkie-talkie to tell Sam what he sees. So why didn't Sam use the walkie-talkie to contact his team while he was chasing Richard down the stairs? Well, the movie's glad you asked that. It's because Sam doesn't have one. Henry, the third marshal that was with the group, is now running with Sam, and he has one. It really says a lot about the past 5 years of filmmaking that I felt the need to point out and praise the simple fact that they remembered that Sam didn't have a walkie-talkie. Richard runs into a St. Patrick's Day parade and disappears into the crowd. So now Sam is at a press conference looking dazed, and this is the only thing that he pushes back on.
The chronology straight here. The suspect was tried, convicted, incarcerated, escaped, presumed dead, and is presently at large in the city of Chicago. Is that correct, sir?
All except for the part about being presumed dead.
Again, Jones just plays this perfectly. He is tired and confused and annoyed and frustrated, and all of those emotions are in every single line delivery. Richard gets to the last name on his list, and there doesn't seem to be anyone home, so he decides to break in, even though there's a cop outside the house keeping an eye out for him. Kimball finds photos and realizes that this is the man. But as he goes through, he finds photos of the man's associates, and it becomes clear that this wasn't a robbery gone wrong. This man was hired to kill him, and he happened to not be there when he arrived. Now, this is one of the very few things in this movie that I could foresee people complaining about. The movie intentionally keeps information from the viewer that would help them unmask this conspiracy. But I would argue that that's approaching this movie incorrectly. It's really not a mystery to be solved. It's a manhunt. Richard knows who did it, and he's just trying to find him. Once he finds him, though, an undiscovered conspiracy starts to reveal itself, and then we find out more information as Richard does. A pharmaceutical exec who is testing a new drug with the help of Richard's hospital, and some really nasty side effects were starting to show up. So Richard makes the crazy decision to call Sam, and Sam tries to stall so they can trace that call, but Richard knows that and wants them to find the place. So he doesn't hang up the phone and just leaves instead. Once again, he escapes, and now the marshals are looking at everything in the house. But this time, that's exactly what he wanted them to do. One arm, his name is Sykes, comes home and talks to the cops. And I've never paid that much attention, but I think that this is the first time that this music has played since the opening when we saw Mrs. Kimball get murdered at the beginning. Sam questions Sykes, and we discover that he works security for the pharmaceutical company Devlin McGregor, which is just really well named. I mean, it sounds real, right? Sykes is pushy and irritable the whole time, and Sam suspects him, so he says he wants a cop to keep an eye on him. Sam is really starting to wonder about Richard's innocence here. Richard calls Charlie and tells him that he found the killer and who hired him, but Charlie tells him that the primary suspect died in a car crash. Charlie asks if Richard can prove the drug had some nasty side effects. Richard doesn't answer and instead tells him to call someone at the hospital to tell them Richard needs help. He says, of course. Sam questions Charlie right after. They ask him about the other man in a photo with Sykes, the man that was Richard's main suspect, and Charlie says that he doesn't know him. And we as the audience know that this is the first time that he's lied to the marshals. He didn't even lie about seeing Richard. Suspicious. The marshals decide to go to the hospital again for more information. Sykes gets a call that feels really ominous. Richard is in the hospital getting samples from the drug trial. Sykes makes a fake fire call to distract the cops outside his building and sneaks out. The marshals are now at the hospital. Jane Lynch gets a scene with Harrison Ford. In her third movie, lucky, she and Richard look at the samples and they discover that the samples were tampered with. The marshals question the records guy about the dead guy. Records guy tries to cover for Richard, but he does a terrible job. Jane and Richard talk about how dead guy was the bad guy in all this until they make the discovery that most of the hinkiness, you see what I did there, happened the day he died, so it probably wasn't him. And now Richard really knows who it was. The marshals then learn that Charlie lied to them about knowing dead guy, so now both they and Richard would really like a word with him. Sykes has been hunting for Richard since he left his home, and he spots him going onto a train. So they have a confrontation. Oh look, it's the Scrubs janitor. They killed the Scrubs janitor. Shame that. The scuffle continues. Richard overpowers Sykes and, again, checks on the cop. Kimball has places to be, so he runs for it, but now the cops think that he killed the cop, and they will not show mercy. Charlie is giving a presentation about the bad drug that he falsified the test for, and Richard confronts him in the middle of it. Now he doesn't care if he gets caught. The marshals and the police are closing in now, and Richard is doomed. The truth is his only hope now. Charlie tries to beat up Richard, and they fight. It's worth pointing out that Richard does not start either of these confrontations. He's not interested in killing the men who killed his wife. He doesn't want revenge. He wants justice. Sam is closing in. The cops are trying to kill Richard. Charlie, Richard, Sam, and Cosmo all end up in the laundry room of the building. Then, the final piece of Sam's arc. In an attempt to get Richard to surrender, he bargains. He tells Richard that he knows everything about Richard's innocence, including giving him the last puzzle piece. Charlie borrowed Richard's car and copied his keys. Charlie goes a little crazy and sees Sam and Cosmo as a threat and tries to kill them. Man, that had to hurt. They then give the fantastic touch that Richard's last act as a fugitive is to save Sam's life. And in that moment, this simple trumpet melody is so satisfying to hear. I really should look into this soundtrack. It's not on Spotify, though. He surrenders, and we leave with hope that Richard is going to win his appeal now. Oh, and Cosmo's fine, too. Kind of. Final closing line from Sam.
Thought you didn't care.
I don't. Don't tell anybody, okay?
And we're done. I adore this movie. Everything about it is fantastic. There are no weak performances. There are no weak scenes. There are no ill-timed jokes to take you out of the action. There is suspense for days and an absolutely incredible train wreck. It is a perfect movie, and I can't fathom why it's not held up in the upper echelons of greatest thrillers ever made, much less why it's been kind of forgotten. Pass the word around about The Fugitive. This is not a recommendation. This is an absolute must-see movie that people need to remember. You'll see me next time if you subscribe. Bye.